Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, host of the Angelo Robles podcast, and especially important today, the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. We're going to do something. I've done some solos before, but I don't think I've ever done something quite like this. We're going to have the roles reversed today. After my open, I'm going to be the featured subject on an area that, well, I probably don't know that much about, but that's never stopped me before, right? So I'm going to be interviewed by a wonderful gentleman named Ben Greenberg at Caviar magazine. So I'm going to have the roles reversed where I'm going to be on the hot seat today. I would like to give just a pinch of context, especially since probably 99% of you on YouTube probably know me more as an interviewer and the host of the Angelo Robles podcast. But I kind of have a day job. I, again, founder and run Family Office Association. We're a global membership organization dedicated to among the world's wealthiest families. I provide a lot of original proprietary content, masterclasses, digital programming, and many in-person events and private dinners and meetings. I consult, as we're going to learn a little bit about today. So although crypto will weave its way in because it does play into this subject, the subject today is disaster prep for the super rich. And really, I've been doing this a long, long time. I know thousands of $100 million plus families and many billionaires directly. And the insight and their fears and concerns that I get from them has been an opportunity for me to learn, hopefully form my own thoughts, and really look to how families of significance could become, let's go with Nassim Taleb, more anti-fragile. So on that note, without further ado, I'm basically going to hand over the reins to the before mentioned Ben Greenberg. And Ben, I'm going to let you do your thing. I'm ready to go.
Thank you, Angelo. So Caviar Affair magazine was founded in 2004 to provide a private print publication for our readership of ultra high net worth individuals. The goal of the magazine is to enrich the lives of our discerning membership and readers, and expertly crafting content on topics such as wealth management, family offices, art collection, et cetera, ultra luxury travel. We are joined here today by Angelo Robles. He's the founder of Family Office Association. Angelo consults for large-scale family offices on disaster prep, resiliency, alternative assets, and many other things. Angelo is here to talk about a topic that he is clearly passionate about. It's the disaster prep for the super rich. And with that said, my first question for you, Angelo, is why do the world's wealthiest families need to worry about disaster prep?
Almost, I don't know where to start. They should have much to worry about, but sometimes the more you know, the more you worry, and maybe that's not such a good thing. So where do I start? I'm going to start with governments. Effectively, here you are as an entrepreneur or an inheritor. Now imagine as an entrepreneur, you started something from nothing. You built a great company that likely employs a lot of people. You took risk, you levered up, likely. And finally, you maybe have an exit, a significant, let's call it payday from the successes that may be over years, decades, sometimes generations within family. And again, here you are, a contributor to society, employing people, paying taxes, and I think you should be a valuable resource. Yet there's so many different ways that governments and others basically confiscate what I call your wealth. Now, the obvious way is through taxation. I agree, we need some form of taxes to pay for certain basic human needs and goods, to have a military, a defense, etc. But I could argue through various periods, even here in the US, that it gets excessive. There's wasteful spending. But that's not the only way. They also tax you with death. So you're getting confiscated yet again, as I would call it. Now, it gets deeper than that. Runaway inflation and other areas where governments, through their economic policy, leading to what we're dealing now with the federal deficit, inflation getting worse and worse. We all know there's lots of turmoil going on in the world. So there is lots of ways where I've been talking for years that basically there's massive risk in terms of being fragile, not anti-fragile, but fragile for families of significant wealth. Now, I know some of you are going to look at this, and I come from an incredibly humble, welfare background. I get it. But again, the vast majority have built something from nothing. Why are we getting to be such haters in society for those that are successful? Like, is it jealousy? Like, what is it? We should be looking up to people that, for the most part, there's good and bad in any group, but that have been valuable from a societal perspective and paying, I would like to hope, their fair share back. So the other thing that I like to say about governments is governments love you the same way that the same way that ranchers love their livestock. Like, like you're kidding me. Governments make rules to benefit those that make the rules. And often that's not even some of these significant families. Some of us may call that, the powers that be and the entities or people that quote unquote rule the world. So this is just the reality that we have confiscation through taxation, through government policy, theoretically through forfeiture by federal and state government staying here within the US. Like, oh, that can't happen. Yes, it could in multiple different ways. And we're going to get to some of them upcoming in our interview.
So do you want to go deeper on that, on what ways that governments can confiscate property from the individuals that live in their countries?
Well, I would say through either the state that you live in here in the US or federal. There simply may be antitrust in certain companies, which we could argue might have benefit, but also could break up someone or who's building something great. But let's go deeper than that. They could basically bring action on you for forfeiture. Trust me, if they look hard enough, we're going to find something about everyone. So how much do governments want to really press this? Now, I'm not saying this quite happens in the US, but come on, you're not telling me that in other countries that governments obviously have the ultimate power. They control the military, they have an unlimited budget, and let's be blunt, they probably have a monopoly on violence. To think that these things don't happen, maybe you're living in a fantasy land. So I already mentioned what state and federal forfeiture, they take it, and now you have to go prove, and maybe you do, that you deserve, quote unquote, to get that back. But let me bring things to a little bit more timely with what's going on now. And I was in Toronto, Canada a couple of weeks ago on business for about 2 days, and we all know what's going on with the truckers and the Prime Minister, Trudeau, unless something changed that I didn't pick up on in the last week. Basically, of course, because governments know everything, freezing their bank accounts and their centralized. I emphasize that word centralized, and that's part of the whole problem, centralized. When something's centralized, that's going to be a part of the problem. When we get to crypto, potentially that's going to be what we hope, and there's debate, decentralized, but we'll get to that shortly. But they know what you have on the crypto exchanges, governments, of course, and obviously in banks. And to think that they could freeze your account because you disagree. Now, if you think they're doing something illegal, whatever, blocking the highways, then okay, then go and arrest them. But to freeze their accounts is just a scary reach by government, a so-called democratic government. Now, we also have the issue, and we could debate this many different ways, but the US and the EU, look at what they're doing to what I would say Russian oligarchs in terms of basically looking to do the same thing to them. Now, again, it's a sensitive topic. You may feel differently about it, but to think, just being a hardcore libertarian, to think that governments like that, they know what you own, and theoretically through an executive order or something that they could freeze it and you have access, makes me realize what little power that we really have, even someone who's significantly rich. And by the way, if you think, well, the hell with this digital assets and even stocks and bank, like I have title to my art, I have title to real estate. You don't think there's nefarious ways? Often that's just a ledger item that could be erased. That could be deep fakes, although not really applicable exactly in the example that I'm given. And when we have factoring algorithms now, we have the advent of deeper AI, of eventually quantum computing. Like there's going to be probably nowhere to hide. Maybe that's not quite the right word, but to think that anything you own, that you really directly have it and it's yours, how do you prove that? What's the provenance of that? Now, there's various strategies I do with families that for now still work. I'm not going to guarantee that in 5 or 10 years as various things are evolving. So, I mean, Ben, I could go on and on. I know we want to
Yeah.
keep the conversation going with other questions, but I think, yeah, there's lots that could go wrong.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying. It all sounds very extreme and chaotic. I mean, the last 2 years have been as chaotic as any 2 years I've seen in my life. Do you think that things can go worse from here? Do you think that there is an additional level of chaos that we haven't seen yet that we need to anticipate for and plan for?
Of course, there's always potentially where things could get worse. Now, this goes into a whole thing that I do with families as well, and taking after Donald Rumsfeld. We have known knowns and we have unknown unknowns. In theory, like Taleb talks about, you're either fragile, your next step, which is better, resilient, but the highest level, which I could argue may be impossible, but let's go with it being anti-fragile. And I think it's going to be harder and harder, and we'll talk about why in the decade to come, to truly be anti-fragile. But at minimum, can you at least not be fragile? So yeah, things could get a hell of a lot worse. I mean, really, inflation, it's probably way worse than what the government CPI is. And if you're a significant family buying more assets that are appreciating, and again, I know their lifestyle may be different, but where they're looking to buy homes, where they're doing that, their inflation may be 30, 40, 50% a year. And probably their portfolio broadly is not keeping up with it. Many of them are investing, what I'm going to argue is actually too conservative, looking at things from a long-term picture. So there's lots that could go wrong. We're looking at what's going on the commodities market and in oil now with the war. There's lots of things out there. But if there's one that I probably had to point to a little bit to have a concern over, and I'll keep it here in the US, although I'm relatively world traveled, a little bit more limited during the COVID times. So luckily this year I'll be getting out there. I'm going to the Middle East and other locations, actually on some consulting assignments. And I've done them for, former athletes like NBA stars, to Fortune 500 executives, to hedge fund managers. I'm based in Greenwich. They've probably been among my most pertinent, I don't know if I'd use the word supporters because I bashed hedge funds because they underperform, but kudos to the intellectual firepower and the wealth that many of them have built. And then of course, to successful family-run businesses and family offices, hence my name, Family Office Association. So what could really go wrong that they may be concerned about? Now, yeah, I guess I'm wearing my politics a little bit on my sleeve, being, I'm going to go with somewhat libertarian. There's many things on social issues. You would call me hyper liberal and progressive, and I am. But there's certain things where just look at the demographics in the country. It's inevitable. It's inevitable that we are going to have someone like an AOC for a president. And again, there's going to be probably a good percentage of the population that would like that. I'm probably just not going to be one of them, even though I share through half of my cultural heritage, being half Puerto Rican, her cultural heritage. I respect her spunk and intelligence. She has a truckload of followers. She's a dynamic speaker. She's young. And again, I look at the demographics as to what's going on, and I think we're trending towards what I'm going to define as some form of socialism. It's going to be massive increase in taxes. And here's the big one that I think President Biden kind of planted in our ear, even though knowing it had no chance to pass this year. And that is the taxation of unrealized capital gains, which will be especially impactful to real estate and to stock portfolios that are not actively traded and select other assets as well. Now, again, and here's what I tell those that are whatever that top 1,000th of 1%, there's way more of have-nots than haves. you're probably not going to win on the political front. Oh, you might be able to exert influence. You might be able to form your foundation in New Hampshire and offshore, and again, have some level of influence and power, but there's still going to be way more have-nots than have. So part of the solutions to what I'm talking about is, why don't you look at what's going on in society and how you could even do better and give back more? Not to be controlling from behind the scenes, but why don't you give people hope? Why don't you show them the path to being an entrepreneur, to being successful, to the value of a capitalistic system, to, I mean, I would argue, being a libertarian, as opposed to looking to fight it every step of the way and win an unwinnable war, because there's going to be more, again, have-nots than haves. Why don't you try to be helpful with giving back through philanthropic and other initiatives? But I'm still leaving out the big point that I was going to make. I'm sorry, I tend to go on. And that point is going to be, look at what's going on in San Francisco, a beautiful, beautiful city, great people, culture, and restaurants. I've been there, I don't know, 50 times. And it's just saddens me in terms of, I mean, what you could, it's not illegal to steal up to whatever it is, like $900, just walk into a store. And like everyone, like the police don't want to touch you unless you're probably murdering someone. And it's become mayhem. Now, as a society, are we responsible for that? Sure, we should do something to help people. And many libertarians are active providers to philanthropic and other causes with their time and their money, because it's not just their money. I would say their time, their knowledge, and their money. But is what's going on in San Francisco could, I said could, I didn't say it will, or didn't say it won't, but could it spread? Could it go into, which it has already to some degree, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Miami, Houston, really, I mean, I would argue probably any big city. I mean, we saw what happened during COVID with the autonomous zone in Seattle and in Portland, and beautiful communities. I've been to all those areas multiple times. I would consider even moving there until probably now. Like, things could get bad. What happens with jobs with AI? What happens with runaway inflation? What happens with food cost, with oil costs? Things could go really, really wrong. And then families hire me and say, Angelo, well, what could I do? There's a variety of things. One, if they're here in the States, they should be careful with their primary domicile. They should have more of a sovereign capability globally. Now, yeah, the IRS follows you everywhere. So unless you denounce your citizenship, you're not going to escape the oppressive IRS and then following you and taxing you no matter where your income is sourced from around the world, where practically no other country does that. But that still doesn't mean there's not value in having sovereign optionality and flexibility with where you go and where your assets are held, by looking at other countries, meaning passports, residencies, banking relationships. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of that now. Yeah. So there's lots to cover.
Well, so far you've talked mostly about the threats that come from geopolitics, your sovereign government that is governing you as a citizen. Is there any other threats that are outside of that, you know, things that really affect the wealthy families of the world?
Well, it's some of the issues, you know, broadly that I noted. One, I think the sovereign risk is massive and huge. It's a really big one. And the power of governments to amend laws, to do executive orders, and as I mentioned earlier, kind of basically freezing your liquidity, your defenses, what you need, what you worked on, what you built, is really ever so fragile. And I describe even your physical assets could be limited if they really wanted to be nefarious and go after you. And oh my God, we didn't even talk yet. We didn't talk yet about cyber risk, rogue nation states, you know, the black web. If you're someone of wealth and success and you got a lot of information on the dark web, there's really talented bad people all around the world that would love to extort you, blackmail you, trick you, learn trade secrets, or simply just take your money. And a lot of families just sweep it underneath the rug. So these things happen all the time. And by the way, I'm sure they could happen from our own snooping and prying governments in terms of getting insight and resources, I could argue legally or not. So there's tremendous risk out there. I briefly mentioned one also earlier, which to me falls into sovereign, but currency risk, inflationary risk, terrorism risk, both in country and out of country. We're seeing war going on. We had the virus with COVID. I would argue we saw how powerful governments could be and the rules they could implement and how they could, again, I know you may disagree, but limit some of our freedoms. Is this a test for us to see how compliant we are as people? Well, I guess for the most part, we were pretty damn compliant. You give governments an inch, they take a yard. I mean, I believe when the IRS was formed and instituted taxation, and I'm not saying that some taxation is not needed. It is. We do got to pay for certain services and for military, etc. But I think it was 1914 here in the US. This is just temporary. Once you give the government an inch, they're going to want, for my international audience, a meter. So once you give them a centimeter, they want a meter. Like they're probably not going to scale that back. It may ebb and flow a little bit over the years, but this is a way of them to prove, are we really living in sort of a matrix? Maybe not literally, but I'm talking from a figurative perspective. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe governments want us to get college debt, to get married, be a good citizen, pay our taxes, shut the hell up. And I don't know. I guess eventually we die and we're cogs in a wheel. But I'd like to hope that many of you want more than that, want to be an entrepreneur, want to be someone who, however you define success, is success, and doesn't want, all the factors that I'm mentioning coming into play to kind of what I would say, take what's rightfully yours. Sorry, Ben, I'm getting a little extra excited today.
Yeah. Well, you're very passionate about this topic. This is all really scary stuff. I mean, these aren't the things that people think about from the day to day. And even wealthy people tend not to think about them from the day to day. The exception might be hedge fund managers, as you mentioned. But what can people do, just a regular person, somebody who's got a family office, or they invest in hedge funds, or they invest in alternative investments? What's something they can do to go to the next level, to maintain their resources and protect themselves in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give there's nothing perfect. And everyone's situation is going to be different. And when I do an assessment and then I start to work with the family, I mean, I may have 100 to 200 things they should do. And they may say, Angelo, this is a little extreme. Maybe we're only going to do 10 of them. At least it's a start. So here in the US, I would be very cognizant, because actually states do have a lot of power, more than I originally thought until I did more work and looking into it. You should be very acute to where your state of primary residence is. Honestly, probably not New York and California. California is a beautiful state. It's probably the most beautiful state in terms of just its physical diversity and beauty, but it's heavily regulated, taxation, including obviously from the state level. And from what I'm seeing, with what my perception is their political bent, is not something that I would see as attractive. I would look at Texas, Florida, maybe Nevada. I could argue New Hampshire, Tennessee. Now, yeah, some of you are going to say, Angelo, you're picking states with no state tax that probably have a certain political bent, yes, that are run more efficiently, I might add. At the end of the day, I want you to be happy. And maybe paying an extra 3, 4, or 5% in taxes shouldn't have the tail wag the dog. I hear you. Now, I personally also love and enjoy Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. I don't know if I'd want to be there 12 months out of the year, because I do like to be interactive and travel and meet. And I do enjoy the city environment and vibe. But those are areas that I would potentially look at. If I had to narrow down to a big two, I could argue Puerto Rico too, for a U.S. citizen as a U.S. territory from a tax perspective, if you're a statesider going there. But that's also a complex issue that would take a deeper dive to dive into. Generally, Florida and Texas are going to be more friendly from a regulatory perspective, a little bit more personal freedoms and sovereignty, no state tax, and a variety of other perspectives that someone like me, being more on the libertarian side, is going to skew to. But I absolutely feel, like I said earlier, that you should absolutely have sovereign optionality, at minimum, having an opportunity for assets, residencies, and, I guess the ultimate, a passport in select other countries. There's not one perfect answer. New Zealand could be very attractive for some, may not be as much for me. And it would be a pretty expensive buy-in from what you would have to do to work towards your passport. The Caribbean, St. Kitts, St. Lucia, Europe, Ireland, Portugal, arguably Austria. Now, the ultimate could be Switzerland, but that's a tough one. I would probably come in first through Malta and potentially buy residence in Switzerland, which you could, because you'll be in EU through Malta. And if you're really a significant family, I'd set up a family office and possibly buy a bank. It seems to me that a lot of the world kind of revolves for now. It may change around Switzerland. This is my life. This is what I do. Like 20 to 30 of literally 20 to 30 of the wealthiest families ever have a residence, business, and resource in Switzerland. There must be a reason why. Is it to do with the uniqueness that is Switzerland? Does it have to do with the Bank of International Settlements, which if you own a bank, you'll have a little bit more of a, possibly a warmer relationship with, especially in Basel, Switzerland? So there's a variety of factors. I would be open-minded to Singapore, and in LATAM, probably Uruguay would be the one that would stand out the most. There is no perfect fit, but having some degree of optionality would be good. And by the way, for trust and structures here in the US, I'd probably mainly look at South Dakota, number one. I could throw in Wyoming, Nevada, New Hampshire, Delaware, if I had to rank them theoretically, perhaps in order. But you absolutely, for a family of significant wealth, you better have some trust and structures offshore. I'd probably recommend perhaps a trust structure in St. Kitts / Nevis, and maybe the LLC structure intertwined properly for your assets and resources, possibly in the Cook Islands. So those are the two jurisdictions that I described that would be much tougher for the US courts or lawsuits and issues that you may have here in the US to effectively go after. So be strategic. Where do you live? How do you structure your foundations? What kind of trust structures do you have? Where are they domiciled here in the US? Should some of them be offshore? Where should you consider passports? Should you own a penthouse in London? City of London, there actually could be good reasons for that. So, and then we get into banking, which I don't want to go on and on with, but yeah, you probably shouldn't have all your money in one bank. I don't care who they are. And you probably should have a level of global diversity in your banking relationships. Now, that's all getting harder and harder because as we're learning, it's all interconnected. And as technology enhances and gets better, and governments get even more and more power, and the ultimate power, I guess, is the central banks, it's going to be harder. And I'm not saying hiding, not avoiding your taxes, nothing to do with that whatsoever. This is protecting some of your liberties, your freedoms, your optionality, and your flexibility. I could get a little bit into owning gold and keeping it offshore, in owning income producing businesses in certain industries. If I was doing a deep consulting dive, those are all things that I would get into. But the opportunity, as I described, of banking, of assets, of passports, of driver's license, of diversity, you can't really get off the grid. I mean, I guess you might as well be on as many grids as possible to the bad people, to be a little bit more difficult to be snooped into and to be duped in some of the things that I described. And some of them I didn't even get into yet, but we went over cyber a little bit.
Yeah. So is there anything else you wanted to share? I don't know if there's any questions from the audience. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things I'll wrap up with. And again, this is meant to be a little bit of a teaser and primer.
Mhm.
Everyone's situation is different. As some, even singular as some of these topics, takes a long, long time, not even hours, sometimes days and weeks to really get a creative solution to, or what potentially could be, or help in coordination be, let's go with the verbiage, anti-fragile. Uh, what could happen in cities, as I noted, and I bring this up to families of great wealth. What do you think would happen? Let's pick on my backyard in New York. What happens if the electrical grid goes down? Maybe through cyber warfare, maybe through other even more nefarious means. What happens in a city with a gazillion people if, and we already have supply chain issues, but imagine short term, no electricity, no incoming food supply, and I guess limited water. I mean, I'll tell you what would happen, the chaos that I mentioned before. And it won't take a week for that to happen. Okay, it may not happen in one day, could very well happen in 2 or 3 days. And these are areas where you can't even really protect yourself by having a level that you would have in Florida and Texas. And I think the audience knows what I mean by that. Uh, this is a problem. So what, do you have a compound? Okay. Do you see the problem coming? Okay. Those are all valuable strategies. But one of my families, it's a multi-billion dollar family that I did advise on this, like, oh yeah, like we're going to build this massive compound and have oil and it could last for a year, and solar power and farming. And those are all potentially good strategies. I'm like, but if things really go to hell in a handbasket, like, how about your neighbors? How about your community being a good citizen? And by the way, I'm assuming you probably have people, oh yeah, people to protect me and work for me. Well, aren't they going to be worried about their families if things get really bad? Yeah, I didn't really think about that. How about if I pay them enough money? Well, what's enough money? They have family and loved ones, and your money may mean garbage if things are going really to hell in a handbasket and hyper inflation. And basically, what I got to, and I got them to understand, is maybe that head of security at the compound, or the head there, like, hey, there's chaos here. I'm bigger and stronger than you, and I'm meaner. You may disappear. And now that person becomes the lord of the compound. These are ugly realities that could happen. Here's how I like families to think about it. The likelihood of things getting really, really bad like that, and we didn't even get into the potential of nuclear war and all the issues that we're seeing now in a global perspective. The odds are probably small. I'm going to say pre-COVID, all of you probably thought the things I'm talking about probably well under 1%, at least here in the US. Now I think you got to put maybe at 5 or 10%, maybe more. So you have to look at the consequences. The odds may be unlikely, but the consequences are dire. And it's worth it for you to understand and explore your options to hedge or mitigate these risks, as well as be beneficial to hope this doesn't happen, contribute from a societal perspective. But yeah, things could get very, very bad. And again, cyber warfare, electrical grid shutdowns, oil at $400 to $500 a barrel, whatever. There's on the we're always on the verge of chaos that's worse than we think. We just don't want to think about that. And now we have certain things coming together that's putting it more in front of our eyes and just making a reality from it. I mean, I mentioned I would talk a little bit about crypto. I didn't want to talk too much about it, but it does relay into this somewhat. Decentralized means there's no single point of failure. There's not a CEO to put in jail or one computer to shut down, like whatever, a Facebook or something like that. Now, we could argue the government's involvement and control, quote unquote, in certain crypto and Bitcoin, debatable and worthy of a discussion. But yeah, I would argue if you're going to have crypto and you're going to own it on an exchange where you're KYC'd here in the US, the government knows you have it. And like we're seeing in Canada, they could absolutely freeze it. Oh, but I have institutional level custody here. Yeah, they get a letter from the government, your money's frozen. I don't care if you're worth $100 billion, period. You're done. They don't want to go to jail by the federal government. So that's where your own hardware wallet, and it's not that hard understanding it. Now, is there going to be a day when that gets KYC'd where we're reporting that to the governments? Probably that day is coming, but there still is opportunities you could do to be very close to anti-fragile if you want to put the work and effort into it. Not to end, and I'm checking the audience for the chat feature. Now would be a good time to send something, our live audience. There may be something that there's no solution to, well, besides some of the obvious doomsday and things like that. To me, that would be central bank digital currencies, where now they know everything you do. They control your interest rate. They can negatively punish you. And as we saw in my example with the government in Canada, with the truck drivers, and the US and the EU with oligarchs and potentially others, why not spread it out from there? This will make it 1,000,000 times easier for them to freeze that account. Now, imagine a world, it's hard to imagine this here in the US, but imagine a world where the government doesn't like what you say, and they have complete access through central bank digital currencies because the dollar in the traditional way as we know it is gone, or it's maybe underground, but that's going to be very, very limited. Ooh, that's a scary future, and there is no place to hide from that. The best you could do, especially in America, is to say that I'm just not going to accept that. And you're going to vote to make sure that the government doesn't keep on overreaching, where we have complete no privacy whatsoever, and under the complete control, it's already bad enough, but under the complete control of the government. Actually, one more final point in case there's an extra question. And this is basically for all of you that may think that I'm a little bit anti-US. I'm not. Immigrant family from a couple of generations ago. I love the US, and I have no plans to renounce my citizenship. Never say never. But I did want to say this. In my travels and what I'm learning from my families around the world, and my little experience recently in Canada, it's worse in pretty much every other country. We at least have some semblance of stability in government, of contract law, of whatever, military and entrepreneurial workforce, immigrants. There is way, way, way more people that would want to come into the US than those that want to leave. And you should never forget that. And the other locations, are you going to trust a dictatorship, or that could turn into that in LATAM, or worse taxation and other issues we're seeing in New Zealand and Australia, and not having the military might of the US against evils, quote unquote, around the world? This may be the best of a bad apple. So maybe you should work on your influence in government, on helping people in need and society, and fighting those central bank digital currencies with all you got. Because once that's in and they turn that up more and more, I think it may be over. I mean, it's done. But again, it's going to be probably worse in other parts of the world. I could debate maybe Switzerland, but I could make a negative outcome for that as well, especially with central bank digital currencies. Well, Ben, I kind of hate to end on a little bit of such a negative note. It looks like, although that was a little bit more positive for the US, it doesn't look like there's any questions coming in via the chat feature from the audience. I think I left them stunned. I would like to do a little bit of a close and then allow you to say a couple of words, of course, as well. Yeah. So, yeah, I got a little bit excited today because I'm really excited about, and it's a bad way, but I'm fearful of that. What could go wrong? And many of you just know me as someone who does interviews on YouTube, does some digital programs, is a master of ceremonies at physical events. And I love that. That's a lot of fun, but hopefully I'm a little bit more of a deeper thinker, even if I'm a little crazy and creative than some of you may have thought. So for those of you that aren't familiar, I mean, Family Office Association, I guess you could say, caters to those that have been incredibly successful. often coming from very humble backgrounds. And the opportunity for me to provide a peer group with creative thought leadership that I create both in my master classes in person, my social media, and my one-on-ones. Now, yes, when it gets to be pretty deep, like the things we're talking about, that we'll need to engage into a consulting assignment, but hopefully for some, that provides a level of value. I love what I do. It's a passion of mine. And I think there's certain areas around how to create a family office, how to restructure a family office, how to build what I call a indestructible family office, areas around crypto and digital assets, and of course, disaster prep that we're talking about today, that I live and breathe this 24/7 and have insights and access to literally among the top 50 families in the world. Learning from some of the best, also learning they do a lot of things wrong, and where I may be able to actually impart a little bit of guidance and advice on what I know. They're probably going to know a lot more about how to build a company and make a truckload of money. But there may be certain things I know about how to keep that wealth and how to preserve a stable, let's call it, society moving forward. Many of you could follow me on social media, Angelo Robles Meta, which is more of a personal on Instagram, but I weave in some business and stuff into there. I'm active on LinkedIn, obviously on Family Office, as many of you know, on Twitter and YouTube. And my core company, Family Office Association, is familyofficeassociation.com. I'm Angelo at familyofficeassociation.com email. I take on a couple of consulting assignments a year. I love it. I'm passionate about it and have an opportunity for a couple of more, especially internationally and with the travels I'm doing both to Europe and the Middle East this year. So again, pardon me for going on a little longer than I wanted. I'm not going to say I'm the most polished person in the world. I'm not, but hopefully my passion and my devotion to this makes up for that. And Ben, I'm going to give you the final words.
Well, Angelo, thank you for your time, for the passionate, opinionated information. I think you take things down one path very, very thoroughly. And I think that gives a unique perspective. I think readers and viewers, now that we have, can take a lot away from that. Even if it's just to give them pause, to let them think for a second, am I doing everything the way I could to maximize the efficiency of my wealth, but also to protect the downside from these tail risks that you're talking about, some of which are precedented, some of which are unprecedented, some of these unknown unknowns. I think that there is the potential for people to do things a lot better in regards to this stuff. And I think that people are finally starting to realize how fragile the system may truly be with some of the things that we've seen in the past 24 months. So again, thank you for your time, and let's do this again sometime.
It'll be fun. And Ben, for those that want to learn more about Caviar Magazine, is there a website they could go to?
Yes, so Caviar Affair Magazine, you can go to caviaraffair.com, check out some of the stuff on there. And we have a private readership, so we have our own list that we use, and we don't really take new people in unless they come through the network itself.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple of words. I think Ben and Paulina over at Caviar Affair Magazine do an amazing job. They're deeply passionate, very dedicated to what they do. Definitely go and check them out. And it's something I highly recommend. Again, you want to have the right intellectual resources at your fingertips. And I didn't get into, but I'll leave this maybe as a hanging point a little bit that helps to address the ability to be anti-fragile. And that is, your network is also your net worth. You want to have knowledgeable, powerful, influential, capable people around the world that are a global network for you. Now, yeah, if things go down electrical wise, hopefully satellites or sat phones, we didn't get into a whole bunch of communication protocols that I work with families. But I did want to emphasize the power of your network. And that really goes to Family Office Association. And the work that I do is really the most powerful part. It may not be the writing that I do or what I talk about. It's the other people that you actively meet by being active in my global network that are incredibly successful, knowledgeable, and deep connectors. I could have a million stories to share about how they helped one another, probably more than I could. But again, Ben, we'll maybe save that for a different time.
All right. Cheers, Angelo.
Cheers. A pleasure. Thank you, everyone. I hope you
Pleasure.
enjoyed it. Thank you.